Do you want Rolex quality, but you don't want a Rolex? Do you want a nice watch, but perhaps you just don't want people to see that you're wearing one, and there's just something about Rolex that doesn't draw you to the brand for whatever reason? If this is you, watch this video. We're going to be talking about the top Rolex watch alternatives. Let's do this. Welcome back, you're chatting with John P. Today, once again, we're talking about Rolex watch alternatives. So, perhaps you want a nice watch, you want a high quality watch, perhaps something in that Rolex price point, but for whatever reason, Rolex is just not for you. Maybe Rolex, something about the brand name, it's too flashy for you. Perhaps you live in a part of the world where you don't want someone knowing that you have an expensive watch, or maybe there's just something about the Rolex brand that is just too commonplace for you, right? Everybody and their mother wants a Rolex watch, and while I do enjoy Rolex, I do also enjoy a different brand here and there just to switch it up in the rotation. And so what we're going to talk about is common Rolex watches. I've comprised a list here of arguably the most common Rolex watches and what alternatives you can get that look a lot like the Rolex models and also offer similar or almost the same quality, if not in some cases a little bit better quality than the Rolex models. So let's do it, but hit that subscribe button. I do appreciate it. You've been so great with subscribing, and that really does keep me pushing forward. Really appreciate that. Wristwatch check. I know some of you want me to get rid of this thing, but got to do the wristwatch check. It is customary. So we got the Breguet Type 20 chronograph on the wrist. Probably going to wear this for about the weekend, maybe into early next week. Really awesome watch. Picture here. Check it out. Nice chronograph. Actually, a Daytona alternative, kind of. Anyway, back into the topic. Rolex watches and their off-brand or other brand counterparts. So let's get into it. Let's just jump right in, pick out the first model. What do we have? Arguably the most popular Rolex model in the casual line is the Rolex Datejust. So now, Rolex Datejust, iconic watch. When you think of watches, you think of a Rolex Datejust. It's just something that goes hand in hand with the watch industry and the collecting hobby. The whole thing. Rolex Datejust is watch. So when you look at a modern alternative to the Datejust, we have to look at the Ingenieur. Now, IWC has a new Ingenieur. They call it the Ingenieur Automatic. And now, previously, the Ingenieurs came in a bit of an integrated bracelet layout, right? You'd have an Ingenieur, and it's an IWC, and it's kind of, that like technical sports watch, but a little more refined. It could be swap either way between dressy and casual. And they've gone, and IWC has taken that watch, and they've translated this into honestly, an amazing Datejust alternative. And so when you look at the picture here, they have so many different variations. I think there's about 7 or 8 variations, and that's a lot for just kind of a standard base model watch from a manufacturer like IWC. They have 7 variations. So they have a gold version, they have different dials, and if you look at the picture and you compare it here with the picture of a Rolex Datejust, I mean, it looks like it's very similar, right? To someone that doesn't know watches, and even someone that does know watches, the styling cues are similar, right? It's got the same functions, features. Depending on the size of Datejust you order, this Ingenieur is a 40 millimeter, so it could be too big for you if you have a smaller wrist. But in my opinion, it wears like a smaller 40. I mean, it is a more casual watch. If you get it on a strap, it will wear a little bit smaller. But the interesting thing, in my opinion, is that IWC it's almost like they're trying to compete closely with Rolex with this model, considering what Ingenieur used to be and what it is now. It's just very interesting and something that I noticed recently, and I bet you probably haven't noticed it, that IWC wants to directly compete with Rolex on that model. So, of course, it's missing the Cyclops, but the other one in this category, right, a Datejust alternative, I have to mention the Omega Aquaterra. So Omega, it's without a doubt, Omega has been like they have a target set on Rolex back for the last 10 years. They've been coming directly at Rolex. They've been making similar watches, and they've increased their prices to compete with Rolex. Rolex has raised theirs a little bit so that they can say, hey, we're still Rolex. But Omega, they've really improved their quality, and they've come up with and they've solidified their product offering line, and what you have is the Aquaterra that is kind of their Datejust alternative. So, I mean, of course, you're missing something like a Cyclops, but when you look at the design, it's very familiar. It has that same overall layout, design, function of a Datejust. Of course, it's their own rendition. These aren't like homages. No one's ripping off Rolex here. I mean, these are, prestigious manufacturers here, and I do mean prestigious, somewhat loosely, at least in terms of Omega. But nonetheless, they do have a track record just as long as Rolex does. So, if you're looking for that quality Datejust, but you don't want the Rolex, consider one of these alternatives. The IWC Ingenieur, the new one, the 40, or some version of the Aquaterra. There's so many. Rolling into the next item here, the Submariner. Okay, when you think of sports watches and Rolex sports watches, oh, the Submariner. Every 40 plus or 50 plus guy that reaches a certain pinnacle in his career in any middle America city, and including a lot of major cities up until the last 10 years, buys a Rolex Submariner. It's just something that happened, right? It's a rite of passage, at least in this country, where you make a certain point in your career or your life, or perhaps your 30-year anniversary with your wife, something like that, a milestone and achievement, and the marketing definitely suggests this from the brand. You basically buy a Submariner. It could be casual. You can wear it, you can dress it up a little bit for those of you that don't go to black tie events. This is a staple, an American watch staple. It just is. And so when you look at alternatives, you need to consider a dive watch, right? And so Omega Seamaster. There are handfuls of Omega Seamasters. Here I'll have the newer, or not the newest, but technically the last gen, non-wave dial, flat dial, black ceramic Seamaster, and wow, this is an absolutely great alternative to the to the Rolex Submariner rather. The Rolex Submariner, while the newer maxi case is going to be a bit thicker of a watch, it is higher quality. I was very impressed when this ceramic Seamaster came out in terms of quality. I could not believe what Omega has done with this particular watch, and I was very impressed. And when you consider the price points, I mean, we're talking roughly, I believe, a third in terms of retail value. I always look at everything in terms of pre-owned value, because that's what we do with Delray Watch. Check it out, delraywatch.com, where actually I think we have one of these in stock at the time of this shooting. But when you look at the quality, I mean, it doesn't trail far behind a Rolex Submariner, especially a last-gen Rolex Submariner pre-ceramic. I mean, you get a ceramic bezel, you get the coaxial movement, the modern coaxial movement. Omega has really perfected the coaxial movement, in my opinion. It's a win-win, and it wears so well. The bracelet, oh wow. The bracelet on this watch, it sounds kind of silly. Like 5 years ago, I couldn't fathom myself, being such a fanboy for this watch, and I don't know that I would wear it. It doesn't fit too good on my wrist just because of my awkward wrist size, but for most people, this Seamaster is such a great choice, and considering I think you can get these things full kit, mint condition, box and papers for around $2,700 US. Oh, I mean, you have a value proposition there as well, but as a Submariner alternative, you just can't go wrong, and you need to consider this watch, absolutely, hands down. Not to mention, they have a blue version, so if you don't want to spring for the Rolex Smurf, which is the all-white gold Rolex Submariner, I mean, you don't want to pay precious metal price, get the blue Submariner. You're going to love it, I promise. Next item, Daytona. Can you think of a hotter watch than a Rolex Daytona? Now, particularly, here's the deal, actually. So, Rolex, in their Daytonas, they used to use Zenith movements. If you're not familiar, Rolex used Zenith El Primero movements in their watches, and actually, they modified it, right? Like I had a very long conversation recently with Hans about this, and earlier on, when Rolex used El Primero movements, they they lowered the beat rate because they felt that having such a high rate was difficult to maintain for a long term. Zenith completely disagrees, and most watchmakers, including Hans, disagree. But Rolex, they had this opinion, and they make a really rugged, long-lasting, easy to maintain watch, and so they didn't want the beat rate that high. So at a certain point, they did lower it down. But anyway, when you consider that Rolex was using the Zenith El Primero movement, when you're looking for a Daytona alternative, you need to consider a Zenith El Primero watch. Now, Zenith makes so many El Primero watches. I mean, there are so many over the years. I'll have a picture here from the time when Zenith called their watches the Rainbow. I don't know why they called it the Rainbow. Actually, one of their models did have a multicolored bezel, but I don't think it actually was basically a rainbow. I don't know. They called their watch a rainbow at one point in time, and they had this particular Daytona alternative in their product offering, and wow, this thing screams Daytona. In fact, I find it a little more charming than a Daytona. It seems to be, at least from a Daytona of that era, a precious metal, yellow gold Daytona, it's a little more charming in my opinion. And considering you can get this for also roughly the third of a price, if not even less, depending on which precious metal Daytona we're talking about. I mean, even considering a stainless steel Daytona from that era, I mean, wow, fractions of a price, fractions. It really is a great alternative, and considering the movement in there, in my opinion, is hands down the best chronograph movement in all time, even compared to the Valjoux 72 or Rolex's rendition of the Valjoux 72 or any of the Landerons. This movement, best chronograph movement ever. I'll say it. Anyway, when you look at the quality of the watch as well, Zenith makes a very great product, especially modern Zenith. It's just on par. It's on par with some of the best. It just is. They're a great manufacturer, and they're overlooked. So consider the Zenith El Primero as a Daytona alternative if you don't want to be too flashy and too in your face, and you want to be a little more interesting and unique, and maybe you want to save a little bit of money too. This video is really not about saving the money. It is more about just having a as good or nearly as good or even a little bit better alternative than the Rolex watch. But if you can save a little bit of money and buy an extra watch, why not, right? Everyone loves a good bargain. Let's go on. GMT Master. I absolutely hate to do this one because my last video talked about it. Anyway, GMT Master, Pepsi bezel, the Rolex GMT Master or GMT Master 2 Pepsi bezel. Now, this watch in the last 2 years, completely skyrocketed. I don't get it. It's a nice watch. It's a great watch. It's very desirable. Rolex is doing some funky things in the industry right now. There's a lot of debate and conversation about this, and all I have to say is this watch is very desirable. You can buy one if you want to. You can dig around. You're going to pay top dollar, and for many of you, that's perfectly fine. But once again, if you do want to save a little bit of money, or maybe you just don't want to have this watch because everyone's going to know what it is, and you're just not that guy, and there are many people we work with at DelRayWatch.com that are just not that guy, right? They're not casual wearers. For whatever reason, Rolex doesn't do anything to them. They just like having an interesting watch. It's technically a Rolex, but what it is, the alternative here is the Tudor Black Bay GMT Pepsi. Okay, so it basically is still a Rolex, but it's also fractions of the price. It doesn't say Rolex on the dial, so you win in that corner, right? It doesn't say Rolex if you're avoiding that for whatever reason. And the quality is there, sure, like it kind of has that like fake rivet bracelet, but for those of you that don't mind that, the bracelet is high quality. The rest of the watch is very high quality. You get that, kind of traditional GMT watch look. There's really no other great alternatives. You have Tag Heuer that makes one. I'm not even going to put a picture here because I don't consider it in the same ballpark as the other watches we're talking about. That will be for another video. But when you're talking, Pepsi bezel GMTs, I mean, how many are there? There's so many knockoffs, but it takes a certain brand to make, a complete knockoff of another watch. And luckily for Rolex, they're Tudor's Rolex, so they can do this and no one will complain, and so that's why it makes the list as an alternative. I had to do it, and last one here. Of course, there's many more Rolex models. You know, I can go all day. It gets very difficult when we look at alternatives for something like, you know, the Explorer 2 or the Explorer 1. I mean, we have to work with a bit of a stretch when you start talking about those watches, or the Milgauss, or even the Cellinis, right? I mean, Cellinis, some dress watches, you could talk all day about that stuff. But there's one watch that I don't think you can find a great alternative to by any means of any imagination on the planet, under no circumstances, ever do I think anyone can come up with a great alternative for this watch. It's a newer watch that Rolex released in the last, you know, recent times. I don't think you can come up with one. Actually, let me tell you the watch first, and then in the comments below, tell me if you have an alternative for this watch, and it needs to look similarly too. It just can't have the functions, the functions are kind of an obscure combination. We have the Rolex Sky-Dweller. Now, the Rolex Sky-Dweller is undeniably one of the biggest releases of Rolex in modern times. It's a whole new model. Everything about it is unique. It shares an annual calendar with a second time zone function, which is a very unique complication mixture. At the top of my head, I couldn't think of too many watches that did this. There were some that were very similar, but no watches that did it directly like this watch, which makes it extremely unique. The shape is very generic, right? It's generic for a Rolex case. It looks like a Rolex watch. It's everything Rolex wants to be and wants to portray in their modern day lineup, which makes it a future icon, and honestly a current icon for those of you that are in the know. But nonetheless, there's no alternatives. You know, I challenge you in the comments below to leave an alternative to this watch, or a good alternative. I mean, I don't want to hear some obscure thing that, you know, is quartz driven and, you know, sold on Alibaba. I want to see a good quality manufacturer, and you guys know who those are because you guys are in the know and you know better because you're watching this. So leave me in the comments below a Sky-Dweller, a Rolex Sky-Dweller alternative. It's been killing me all morning here at Del Rey. I need to know. Someone leave it there. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this list. If you're new to the channel and you're new to watches, please do consider these alternatives before jumping directly into a Rolex. While I do enjoy Rolex and I own Rolexes, and of course with Del Rey we sell pre-owned Rolexes, oftentimes you either can't get your hands on them, or they can be a little too expensive, or for many people, they just don't want to wear the Rolex name on their wrist. Well, I don't mind. I enjoy it. They are, you know, basically pop icons at this point. Some people just don't like Rolex for whatever reason, and it's just personal reasons, right? So I'm not here to judge, but I'm here to provide alternatives. You know, consider these alternatives. They are great alternatives. You cannot go wrong with any of these watches on the list, and I will stand behind the recommendations because they are that solid. Anyway, thank you so much for watching, guys. Thanks for sticking with me through all these videos. I'm trying to pump out more videos for you by request, by demand. Leave in the comments below things you'd like to see, and hit that subscribe button. I see those subscribes come in my inbox, and I just get excited, and I just make more videos, honestly. So if you like what you see, subscribe. Every time I see subscribe, I just want to make another video for you. It's just interesting to me. So anyway, thanks guys. You've been chatting with John P. Have a great weekend. Ciao.